Now, this week, it's either been about avoiding or embracing the UK's record-breaking heat. And while travel disruptions have dominated the aftermath, there are warnings we should be paying attention to the bigger picture, which is climate change. According to the Met Office, extreme heat and exceptionally high temperatures will become even more common. So, how can we manage this? I'm joined now by the visiting Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at London South Bank University, James Woodhousen, and Chief Executive of One Home and Environment Scientist, Angela Terry. Welcome both. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. James, if I could firstly start with you. Given the disruption that we've seen today at our airports and train station, is that an indication that when it comes to the infrastructure, we really need to start looking at upping our game?
Well, I think we need to do that regardless of the temperature change, which is very grievous, there's no doubt about it. I think even in a cold day, we complain about the wrong kind of snow at airports, the wrong kind of leaves on lines, it's too cold and stuffy in a hospital. And when it's hot, of course, many old people do die in hospitals because we failed to prepare the infrastructure. We failed to adapt to climate change, and that's really what we need to do if we're to take it seriously.
James, you're an expert in innovation and infrastructure. What about the time frame? What are we talking about? I mean, how long will it take in order to be able to avoid what we've seen today?
Well, the head of Network Rail, I think it was, said, you know, we organise our rail tracks for 27 degrees. That's what we do. End of story. I find that just as complacent as rail operators are in getting me to a station on time. I think your question, Gamal, about time frame is very useful, in fact. If we were to adopt, say, Sony Rheon portable wearable air conditioning units, which they've just launched, REON, on our bodies, we would keep cool. If we introduced air conditioning at trains rather than turning it off, as very green Switzerland does, we would make the bearing of these heat waves much easier to do. And I think that's a much faster measure than lowering emissions by not travelling abroad and so on. I'm all in favour of lowering emissions, and there are lots of technological means to fix that. But I think personal air conditioning, smart clothing that can keep you cool, air conditioning units and so on, are the way ahead. Of course, that will take electricity and energy to power, but if that's the way of making sure that hundreds, no longer the old thousands, but still hundreds, don't die of heat waves because of our failure to prepare, then that's a small price to pay.
Angela, record temperature recorded yesterday in Cambridge, 38.7 degrees. Is the high temperatures here to stay?
Unfortunately, yes. We are going into a period now where extreme temperatures are here to stay, and extreme weather events such as floodings and storms, superstorms. The important thing to register is that the temperature record that we saw yesterday will probably not remain the highest temperature ever recorded in England for long. So we're coming into August now, and if it's not this year, it'll be in the next few years. The temperatures will keep going up because we keep producing greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, which trap more of the sun's heat. And so the more we burn fossil fuels, the hotter, the more global warming we will experience. And the reason that is bad for two reasons. Firstly, the hot planet, obviously, it's harder to sustain life. So we are seeing lots of species dying out and crop yields reduce. But the other reason is the hotter it becomes, the faster the ice is melting, both at the polar regions and in our glaciers. And so those glaciers provide fresh drinking water for millions, if not billions of people. But the ice at the poles and Greenland melting is the real problem we'll have to face. And that is one issue for infrastructure going forward, because the faster our seas levels rise, the quicker we have to adapt to our changing coastline as more cities, towns, villages have to adapt to a changing coastline, basically.
James, would you agree with that as a case of adapting to the changes that we're seeing and the change in the coastline, for example?
Well, I think it is, and I already called for adaptation. I think at the same time, you know, it's very important to separate weather from climate. An individual weather event, such as the heat wave that we're experiencing, cannot be by itself directly attributed to climate change. Climate change makes such events more likely, but it can't really explain individual weather events. And I think it's quite important in all of this to preserve a rational and balanced attitude. I think many reports on the melting ice caps and melting glaciers, certainly in India, have been exaggerated and are far too apocalyptic. And I think that some of the measures that Angela proposes on her site, which I've taken the liberty of having a look at beforehand, like staycations rather than going abroad, might sound appealing to some, but I put it to you, Angela, that people need to investigate foreign countries. We can't all take a train to Malta, as I believe one of your correspondents did. People do have to get around, and surely the answer must be to adapt our aeroplanes to biofuels, to make our airports more reliant on renewable energy, on nuclear energy, to equip our fossil fuel powered stations with carbon capture and storage. There are lots of technological solutions beyond actually cutting back and imposing austerity on our holidays and on our travel patterns. People can't go from London to Birmingham by bike. It's simply not possible. Nor can they guarantee that the rail lines will be, if I may finish, or nor can they guarantee that the rail lines will be conducted by, carbon-free electricity. So we've got to be balanced about it.
OK, Angela, I saw you vigorously shaking your head. What would you like to say?
I think what's really useful to point out is that the heat wave that was experienced in France just last month, climate scientists have already said it was 5 times more likely due to climate change. So the science of attributing individual weather events to climate change is increasing and improving all the time. But it is like saying that if a car is going to crash and it's a drink driver behind it, then the alcohol had nothing to do with the crash. You cannot keep ignoring the fact that fossil fuel burning in the world has been going up. Last year it went up several percent. We have known about climate change for 30 years. We cannot hold back the sea. And we know for a fact that the more fossil fuels we burn, the bigger this climate emergency will be. So for people who want to try and pretend that we can just keep adapting, there are 2 really big problems with that. Firstly, we know the most poor are suffering the most, and they have done the least in terms of burning fossil fuels. And so who can afford air conditioning? If it's 39 degrees, nearly 39 degrees in this country, imagine what it's starting to become the closer to the equator you get. I mean, there are certain parts of the world that are lacking water and are basically becoming unlivable. It is too hot for any humans to survive in those temperatures anymore. So that is a key problem. We cannot keep burning fossil fuels, and to suggest that we can just adapt to it is the sort of story that oil companies would like people to believe, so that they would keep buying 4x4s and SUVs and planning holidays. No one is suggesting people have to cycle to Birmingham. I think the idea of turning this into a laughing issue is actually really irresponsible, because people are dying. People are dying in this country and abroad because of climate change. We know how to stop it. We haven't been doing what we need to do. And we have an excellent record in the UK where we have the energy policies to promote offshore wind farms and renewable energy. Businesses innovate. Businesses want to be going into net zero UK. And the faster we do it, the less people will be harmed.
Okay,
and
James,
it's a very serious issue.
James, would you like to reply?
Well, if one was ignoring mitigation of carbon emissions, why would I call for carbon capture and storage, nuclear power and renewable energy? I don't believe you're listening to me. I'm afraid. I favour both lowering emissions and technological adaptation, and I see technology, not changes in lifestyle, as the means to bring about both objectives. As it happens, adaptation is much faster than the aggregate of all the green-thinking people in the world cutting down their journeys, never venturing for a holiday outside Britain, and so on. That may make a little bit of a difference in the very, very long time. Right now, a number of people are dying, much fewer than before, because our houses are better, our infrastructure is better, that people are dying, so we do need to take rapid action, and that's why air conditioning is very important to prevent heat wave deaths. I ask you, Angela, are you in favour or are you not in favour of air conditioning on trains?
The key issue when it comes to human health is that people are protected. So in terms of keeping people cool, air conditioning, I mean, the tube, for example, the temperatures down there are excessive. What we have to ensure, though, is that when we have air conditioning, it is coupled with solar power, because what we know is the hot temperatures are normally aligned with the sun, and so to be burning extra fossil fuels and compounding this problem makes no sense at all.
So until we get solar power, you would not favour air conditioning?
Done with clean, renewable energy.
And it's not clean. Solar power involves mining of all kinds of materials which would not fit your definition of clean.
We're talking on top of each other. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. A very interesting debate, two very polarised views as well. Thank you very much for your time. James Woodhousen, Angela Terry, appreciate your time. Thank you.